Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to MusicForever, where today we're reviewing the new album from Queens of the Stone Age, Villains. Alright folks, I'm really excited for this review here today because it's for one of my favorite bands of all time, Queens of the Stone Age. It's really, ever since I got into music, this has been a band that has consistently impressed me with new releases, and, well, really, they've only released one new album since I've been a fan of this group. But like clockwork, that album happens to be my favorite album from this group. That album, in my opinion, is just fantastic all the way through. And even their other albums as well, I do really enjoy. In fact, even my least favorite albums from this group are still albums I really enjoy and come back to often. And that's just a sign of the quality of this group overall. So coming into Villains, I had high expectations given that this band has never disappointed me in the past. I did review the lead single from this project the way you used to do on my channel, which is going to be linked in the description and on screen here at the end of the video if you want to hear my further thoughts on that track, at least what I thought of it when it was initially released, because my thoughts have slightly changed on the track and I'll touch on that later. But based on that song, I was still, anticipating this album, and I still was excited because I did enjoy the track, but I wasn't completely sure what we were going to be getting here. Based on that single, I was kind of expecting a cross between maybe the sound of Like Clockwork and Era Vulgaris, because it did have that sort of sound to it. But here what we get with Villains is honestly what I think is the natural progression of this band after Like Clockwork, to be completely honest. Where Like Clockwork kind of saw the band going in a more, I guess you could say, not as heavy route to some degree. Lots of Queens of the Stone Age older music I feel is filled with lots of heavier guitar riffs, almost mechanical in their styling. Like Clockwork kind of broke away from that, having a bit more of a natural feel to it to some regard, and it is something I enjoyed, and that's kind of continued here on a lot of these tracks, though you do still get those sort of mechanical riffs that pop up every now and again, like on the lead single that I was talking about before, which just very obviously does have that mechanical sort of riff going through it that is very much Queens of the Stone Age in nature, and that is something that I enjoy about that track. And that track, going back to it, is something that in the context of this record as a whole, I enjoy a lot more than I did when I just initially heard the track by itself. In my initial review, I said I liked the track, but it wasn't one of my favorites. And here, I still don't think it's one of my favorites on the album, but it is better, in my opinion, in the context of the grander record as a whole. And overall, this album is filled with lots of jams that if you liked Like Clockwork and just sort of the more introspective, darker sound that album had for Queens of the Stone Age, then I think you're going to like this project a lot also, because it kind of has that similar sound to it as well. Just with the opening track, Feet Don't Fail Me, it starts off with this sort of moody intro, and before kicking into this really awesome guitar riff, it's almost sort of funky in nature, and I just really love it from the second I heard it. I believe they used that riff in one of the teaser videos that they put out for this album initially, and I remember when I heard that in the teaser, I was like, this sounds really good, and now finally getting to hear the track in the context of this record, it just sounds fantastic in my opinion. I just love the sort of bouncy feel that this riff has, and I just love how it carries the start of this record in such a sort of epic and awesome way. Something about this album that I noticed when listening through it multiple times was the prominent use of synthesizers in a lot of these tracks. And I don't mean to say like electronic music type synthesizers. I'm not saying Queens of the Stone Age have gone like completely electronic on us or anything like that. But there's a sparse use of synthesizers throughout this project to create sort of an atmosphere, sort of this dark and introspective, moody atmosphere, I feel. That's something that they kind of touched upon in Like Clockwork, but here these synthesizers really kind of bring out that feeling here on a lot of these songs. Just a lot of these songs have synthesizers in their intros, and even though it's repeated a lot here, just that usage of synthesizers in intros and just throughout these tracks, it never gets boring, and it kind of stands out as being one of the things that makes Villains, I think, have its own identity compared to all the Queens of the Stone Age's previous albums. And really, Queens of the Stone Age, I think all their albums do have a personality of their own, and that's something that I really like about this band. And I'm really happy to see that they've kind of continued that here with this album, giving it something to be a bit more individual and, different, I guess you could say. Take tracks like Fortress, for example, where the synthesizers just create sort of this creepy, almost atmosphere to it. And once again, Fortress, I also love the chorus there on that track as well. And also on Domesticated Animals, the chorus there, I love how just every line that he says, every syllable just seems to have like an impact almost. It's just really catchy, and it's been stuck in my head ever since I started playing this album to review it. It's a fantastic song. If you're not particularly a fan of the more moody and atmospheric tracks that this album provides, and you're more a fan of the tracks like the lead single and its more sort of hard-rocking atmosphere, then I think you're going to like the track Head Like a Haunted House on this album, because that's another track here that has sort of a more upbeat and kind of crazy atmosphere to it. And I just still do think that lyrically it fits in the context of the record. It just manages to kind of bring a more aggressive, guitar-driven sound to it. And that's not to say the other tracks aren't guitar-driven to a degree. It's just that the other tracks have lots of synthesizers going in there to provide an atmosphere as well. And this track is just more like straightforward kind of rock track, and it's really cool. And I like how it kind of breaks up the album after a couple of more of those moody tracks I was talking about before. And another thing about this album that I really enjoy is just that how consistent it feels as a whole. And that's really something I can say about most Queens of the Stone Age albums, but the flow of this album all the way through feels very like well placed. And I really like how you kind of start off with Feet Don't Fail Me, which has a really cool intro, and then it's a bit more of an upbeat opening before you also move on to the second track, The Way You Used to Do, which also has a bit more of a hard rocking sound to it, before you get into some moodier tracks. And then you kind of get Head Like a Haunted House in the middle, which is another more energetic break, before you get some more, I guess you could say, moody tracks following that. And the closing track on this album, Villains of Circumstance, is a really interesting track as well, because I feel like it almost has a bit of an upbeat yet depressing feel to it. It's kind of bittersweet, just sounding in nature, and that's something I do really enjoy, and it kind of gives me, I guess, like, it's difficult to explain, but just the conflicting emotions that the track seems to kind of give off in its sound is very interesting, because his delivery here, Josh Homme's vocal delivery, just sounds really kind of sad and like worn out almost, but the instrumentals do sound a bit hopeful, I guess you could say. It's kind of weird, but it is a reason why I do really like that track, and I think it's a very strong closing track here on the album. The tracks here on this album are also a bit longer than really most Queens of the Stone Age tracks that they've done before. Lots of these tracks being like 6 minutes long or around that length. And that's not to say Queens of the Stone Age haven't dipped into that direction before of having some longer tracks here and there, but for the most part this album has many tracks of that length, and there's only 9 tracks that we get here, which isn't really that much if you think about it, but you know, the length of the album is a considerable length for an album. I believe it's somewhere around 40 minutes or so, a bit longer than that. I'm going to probably just throw it up screen, to be honest, but it's a good length for an album, to be honest. It doesn't feel too short, it doesn't feel too long, it feels like it just delivers the right amount of content. And you know, they obviously were going for quality over quantity here, because they only have 9 tracks, but all 9 of these tracks are very good in my opinion. And there's not really one that stands out as being particularly weak among this entire track listing, but there are many tracks that stand out as being very strong overall, which is a very good thing to have for your album. And like I said, these longer track lengths I think work better for some of these tracks that are going for a more atmospheric feel to them, a kind of darker, moodier feel, especially with those synthesizers I was talking about before. Those are the tracks that tend to be a bit longer, I feel. Tracks like The Way You Used to Do and Head Like a Haunted House, for example, some of those tracks were the shorter ones here on the album. So overall, I think Villains is a fantastic album from Queens of the Stone Age, especially coming off Like Clockwork, which I thought was going to be a difficult task to kind of compare to. However, Villains, I think, is, you know, giving Like Clockwork a good run for its money, and a lot of other Queens of the Stone Age albums as well. I think this is just as good an album as anything else that they've put out before in the past. So if you're a Queens of the Stone Age fan and you like everything that they've done so far in the past, I think you're going to really like this album, because really there's no reason why you shouldn't. I feel like it's the natural progression of this band after Like Clockwork, kind of moving in the direction of a, I guess you could say, a still keeping the moodier feel of Like Clockwork while incorporating some of those more, I guess you could say, mechanical riffs and things of that sort that were used on previous Queens of the Stone Age albums. It just feels like where this band should be at this point in their career, and I think that's a very good thing to accomplish. Overall, I think it's a very good album, probably one of my favorites of the year so far, so you should definitely check it out if you haven't done so already. So make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel as well, so you don't miss out on future album reviews and other music-related content. Comment down below your thoughts on the album, how do you think it compares to the rest of Queens of the Stone Age discography, and stay golden, guys!